Hello everyone. So recently I released a bunch of videos on off-meta sorceress builds like the Swiftness instant cast igniter build or the classless engraving build. And in all of these videos there's always someone in the comments that says, hey, what about the quote-unquote standard Swiftness casting igniter build? And so I thought I'd make a video to look at the build, do some testing, and share my thoughts. So this build uses 1600 swiftness and 500 specialization with 2 nightmare and 4 dominion. The reason why we run 4 dominion is because this build wants to cast explosion and punishing strike twice in the same igniter state, and the 18% cooldown reduction from the 2 set bonus helps out with that. Taking this up to 4 unlocks 15% damage, which is equivalent to the 15% damage that you'll get from the 4 Nightmare and Magic Addiction, but you don't have to worry about Boundless MP. For the Engravings, Grudge, Raid Captain, Igniter, Hitmaster, and Adrenaline, you can run all out attack, but in all the testing that I've done, it's always resulted in lower DPS. That's because this build's damage isn't as focused on the casting spells. And we're taking level 2 Spirit Absorption to mimic the Yearning set effect that we get from supports. For the gems, a damage gem on each skill, then a cooldown gem on Doomsday, Frost Call, Explosion, and Punishing Strike. I've taken the liberty here of raising these to level 8 for the cooldowns. You can do it with level 7, but having them at level 8 makes the build feel a lot better. And in terms of cards, Light of Salvation 18. So in addition to this whole Dominion setup, we also take Conviction and Judgment to help the double cast. Typically, we'll put Conviction on Blaze and Judgment on Rhyme Arrow. And because Bleed has nowhere to go, you usually just put it on your filler skill, such as Inferno or Squall or Ice Shower or whatever you happen to be taking. Everything else is pretty standard. The other major difference is that on Blaze we take the Charge Flame tripod instead of the Flame Expansion one, because this makes it a little bit more consistent in proccing your Conviction buff. The rest of the tripods are pretty straightforward. And in this case, you typically would take Mind Enhancement here to kind of, help you stay in Magic Addiction, but because we don't have to worry about that, you can take Wide Angle Attack instead. Which doesn't really help your damage, but it may help you land Punishing Strike a little bit easier, and you can take Ignite on the other 2 skills. Now in terms of Dominion buff management, if you just cast your Awakening without doing anything, your downtime will be about 30 to 40 seconds. So at the start of the fight, what people will do is pull up their Engravings window and swap to Awakening by placing them here, casting their Awakening inside the battle preparation area, and then swapping back, which will take care of the first round. And after that, the goal is to cast your Awakening skill inside of Judgment. So pay attention to this number, see how long it takes for it to change to 1 minute. And you can see that the downtime is around 10 seconds, which is a lot better. So, out of all of that, the goal of this build simply is to just, cast all of your spells very quickly, fit as many rotations as you can inside Igniter, and proc your Conviction Judgment buff before you ignite. Other than that, there's not much to it, so let's give it a test. I'm going to do a 2-minute test. With any 2-minute test with the Dominion buff, it will be inflated, so just reduce the number as much as you see fit regarding the downtime. Let's go! Okay, so with that, I got a DPS of about 5.4 million. I probably could have rotated that a little bit more cleanly, but as you can see, there is a little bit of mindfulness that you need to have with this build, with not proccing your Conviction Judgment buff too early. And because of that, sometimes you may hesitate with the casting of your Igniter state and such. And also, meter generation is a little bit more hard because, well, you don't have a Wealth Rune on your Rhyme Arrow. And of course, like any Igniter build, it's going to be subject to crit RNG. So I've seen this build score up to like 5.8, 5.9 million if I get my way with crits. But on average, it's going to be somewhere around 5.5 to 5.6 roughly. To put that into perspective, my standard specialization Igniter setup does about 5.8 to 6.2 million depending on crits. So, in terms of my thoughts on the build, very fun, right? Like any Swiftness build, you have a lot of cooldowns, it's much more active than your standard Igniter, there's a lot more canceling and cool skills involved. But my biggest issue with this build is Conviction Judgment, right? The fact that you're pretty much dependent on this to land your Explosion and Punishing Strike in a nice way, unless you have really high CDR gems. And some people who play this build have told me, hey, you don't need to worry about it. If you happen to have it up, great. If you don't, sometimes you'll only be able to get Explosion and not Punishing Strike. But that just doesn't sit right with me. So I started thinking, is there a way I could just remove the hassle of thinking about, Conviction and Judgment and just cast spells freely, more like a reflux player like I am, right? So I eventually said, screw it. Let's go ahead and take off this 4 Dominion business and let's go back to the standard 4 Nightmare 2 Dominion setup. And let's take Conviction Judgment out of the picture. Now that I have access to Boundless MP, even though it might be less damage, I'm just going to cast my skills and get on with it. So I'll change this back to Flame Expansion, and I'll take Ignite off of this. We'll put our Bleed Rune back on Blaze and a Wealth Rune on our Rhyme Arrow. And then for the filler skill, just to make it a little bit more suitable, we can go ahead and put a Quick Recharge Rune. That way that if we cast this spell after we cast our Explosion and Punishing Strike within our Igniter state, maybe we'll get lucky and get a proc and still be able to cast it twice. But if you're in Boundless MP and you cast these spells, you will be able to get off 2 rotations, and while they will do less damage, it's not as stressful to kind of maintain. Alright, so with that, I'm gonna give this a go. I'm not gonna worry about trying to stay in Boundless MP or Magic Addiction. I'm just gonna cast my spells off cooldown like a Reflux player would and see how it does. Let's go! So that one I did get a lot more lucky with the crits, I will say, so this damage probably should be a little bit lower. But as you can see, without the burden of conviction judgment and just sending my abilities towards the boss, it's a lot more comfortable to play. Now with any given swiftness build, right, the more you're reliant on spamming your spells like this variant of the swiftness casting igniter is, in a real raid where there's mechanics and things like that, the other build might be a bit more consistent, more burst favored, and so that might be the build to go for real raiding. But for me personally, if I were to build this up, I would probably do something like this personally myself. So if you are a player who plays Swiftness Igniter and has any more insights to share about this build, I'd love to hear about them. But in any case, that's all I have for you today, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.